Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Cheryl. I'm so glad that you've stopped by. In this video, I'm going to share with you how I created these beautiful poppy cards. And they were created using this beautiful poppy field hot foil plate from Hero Arts. So I've got my Glimmer machine all heated up and ready to go. I put my plate on there. Once the platform said it was ready, I put my foil pretty side to the plate. And then I put some glossy alcohol ink cardstock on there, as well as my other plates, and pressed the platform button. Now I've done alcohol ink cardstock glossy paper before with foiling. It foils absolutely beautifully. I couldn't decide if I wanted to do a gold one on this or a silver one, so I ended up doing one of each. I'm going to use some distress inks to color in the background and the images. So I pull my foil off. After my platform was ready, I put it through my Big Shot machine for the pressure. You need the heat and the pressure in order to do foiling. Now I'm going to do the same process with the gold foil, put it on my machine, press the platform button. Once it stops flashing, it is ready to go, and then I put it through my Big Shot machine for the pressure. And here we have the beautiful background with gold foil. Now I'm going to save those pieces. I'm going to do some solid images with those later. But one thing I want to do is I want to create some masks for this background. So what I'm doing is I'm using some Archival ink. I've just got coffee here. You could do it with whatever color you want. The one thing you need to make sure is that you have some permanent ink cleaner in order to clean your plate off after you've done this. You don't want to leave that ink on there and possibly mess up a future project. I'm using copy paper to put that ink onto, and all I'm doing with this is making some masks for those flowers. When I color my background, I don't want my flowers to be the same color. I want to be able to color them differently from my background. So creating masks is the easiest way to do it, and printer paper most of us already have. You want something that's nice and thin. I'm using some Tombow multi to scribble on the back there. Tombow multi is a really nice ink when you put, really nice glue when you put two pieces of paper together. It's nice and permanent. But if you don't put two pieces of paper together, just put it on the back of some paper, it dries tacky like a Post-it note. So it's perfect for creating masks. Now I'm going to place them on my background, matching each one of the flowers, which is not too hard to do. Each one of the flowers is different from the other, so it's quite easy to figure out which one goes where. But by doing this, I can make sure that I have clear spots for me to color in my flowers and not have to worry about what I had on my background, and I can get a little bit more creative with it. So because I did two foiled backgrounds, I did one with silver, one with gold, I'm doing two colored backgrounds. I'm using my jelly plate to create an ombre effect. I wanted to have one with a blue background, and I wanted to have one with a green background. So my silver foiled piece, I'm going to do the blue background with it. I'm just pressing it onto my plate, and then I'm also using my brayer to rub it on there. Make sure it's got really good contact with the background. I use that same brayer, it's a 6-inch brayer, to ombre my inks to make sure I had some nice gradation between the different colors. If I were to just put that ink onto the background or onto the jelly plate and not use my brayer to ombre it, I would get some clear lines and smudges from pressing my ink plate or my ink pad on the plate, and I want to rub those out. So now that my background is done, I took some of the excess ink off with just a piece of paper towel, and now I'm taking my masks off. When I create masks like this, I'll typically save them with my stamps or dies or hot foil plate or whatever it is that I make them for, and use them over and over again. So I'm using those same masks for both my backgrounds. In the end, I end up using them a few times, and because they're just printer paper and because that Tombow adhesive is really, really good, even as a Post-it note, they end up ripping. But because it's inexpensive printer paper and they really don't take that long to make, it's really easy to make another set if I need it in the future. So I'm using those masks to put on my gold background here, and now I'm going to clean off the blue ink off my plate and do my green colors. I have all the colors that I am using. I'll have them listed and linked down in the description below. So if you're wanting to know what individual colors are, that will be there. I'm also going to clean off that blue ink off of my brayer. I don't want to color my ink on my plate with the ink that's already on my brayer. So best to clean it off ahead of time. Press it down on there and then clean off the brayer for my next project. I typically like to try to clean things off when I put them away so that I don't forget that there's ink on there. Also taking the excess distress ink off of there before I start to remove my masks. You could also just let it sit and soak into the paper, but I wanted to continue and I wanted to see how it looked with the gold and green compared to the blue and silver. So there I have my two backgrounds. I'm going to use some detail blending brushes and I'm going to color in the flowers. I ended up deciding to only color in the flowers that have the blue background because I wanted red poppies. I kind of thought if I did the one with the green background, it would look a little bit too Christmassy with red and green and gold. So I also really liked them just stark white, so I left those white. I have two different sizes of detail blending brushes. One's a little bit bigger than the other. The bigger one is probably about a 1/4 inch wide and the smaller one's probably about an 1/8 inch wide. I'm just using my lighter color red to completely cover the background of the flowers. If you do try this technique, you'll see some squiggles from where the Tombow multi was on there with the masks, but in the end you don't see it. Those tend to go away. So I'm just using the bigger brush to completely cover the background, and I found that the easiest way to do this, to be able to control not going over the edges, is to start on the outside and kind of blend my way in. When it comes to doing the darker color, I'll take the smaller brush and I'll just kind of flick my way out. I just want the darker color towards the center of my poppy. Now this is distress ink, just like the background, so it's going to soak into the glossy cardstock. Glossy cardstock is actually, or the glossy alcohol ink cardstock, I'm not sure about other brands, is actually a clay coated cardstock. So it is porous, that ink will soak into there. It looks like it's not, but it does blend or soak into there. So by leaving it for a few minutes, you'll let that ink soak there. I do use a post-it note on my fingers so that I don't accidentally get some finger marks on some fresh ink. I tend to get more concentrated on what I'm doing with the ink blending and not really paying attention to where my hands are holding it. So by using a post-it note, I can make sure that I don't get my fingerprints in there. If the first coat isn't quite dark enough for what you want, you can easily go back over with a second coat. And the foil part is actually going to resist that ink. You may get some smears from your brushes on there, and you can easily clean that off with a paper towel just to get that nice and shiny again. Now that my lighter color is done, I'm using the narrower brush and I'm going to go in with the darker color. You don't see a whole lot of difference there, but it is slightly darker. I just wanted to have a little bit of variation between the center of the flower and the petal. I could always go in with a third color if I wanted. I didn't actually have a third in this in the red family that I wanted to use without going a little bit too orange, so I stuck with just the two. I also didn't want to make it too complicated, and I figured the two was just fine. I'm going to use another small blending brush because those centers of the flowers are really, really tiny, with some black distress ink just to color those centers. They are open up, so it's not foil, so it's really easy to color those areas and then set them aside to dry. Now I am going to color the centers of the green one black, just like I did with the blue background, because it needs to have that center. It doesn't really look much like a poppy without having that center. So I am going to carefully ink blend or pounce that detail blending brush in the center of those flowers, trying to keep it in that center area. It's quite a small area, so I didn't want to go outside of that. I end up letting this dry overnight, and overnight I thought it would be really nice to have kind of a light stamped pattern in the back of the green one. I didn't want to do it on both just in case I didn't like it, but I thought because there was less colors in the green one that having a stamped background there wasn't going to be too distracting. So I'm taking my masks again, I'm going to put them back on just to completely cover those poppies. I don't want my stamped pieces on, or my stamped background on those flowers. I only want it on the background. And I'm choosing antique linen, which is very light yellow or tan colored ink, to stamp that background. It's very, very subtle. If you wanted something a little bit more prominent, you could. But because that background is fairly busy, and because of the foiling and the shine from that, I didn't want to detract from any of that. I wanted it to be nice and subtle, but it's just an idea of something that you can do for the background that's a little bit different. Once my inks are completely dry, I'm cutting all of these pieces down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. That hot foil plate is just slightly smaller than 4 inches by 5 1/4. So I wanted to make sure that I had the foiled part going all the way to the edges. Off screen, I prepared my card bases as well as my mats, and I shared this in one of my last videos, but I'm going to share it again. If you like to use specialty cardstock, metallic cardstock, cardstocks that are a little bit more expensive, and you also want a coordinating sentiment on there, here is a way to get more use out of that mat. You're never going to see it if you die cut your sentiment from the center of that piece there, because it's going behind your image piece. You're never going to know it's there. And no one ever, I've done this for years, and no one has ever known that I've done this until I've told them. The only way this wouldn't work is if your image piece is slightly transparent, say vellum. You wouldn't be able to do that with vellum or anything. But if you've got a nice opaque piece of cardstock for your image piece, this works beautifully. I also took some coordinating scrap cardstock to cut the non-shadow part of my sentiment here. Because the background is so busy, I wanted my sentiment just to be something very, very simple. It could even go, or the card could even be made without having a sentiment on there. It doesn't necessarily need that, but I just wanted to have something on the front there besides just my poppies. Now I'm going to glue my second piece down, and you'll notice between gluing things down, I'll take an acrylic block and I'll hold down something that I've just glued. It keeps my hands free to do something else while something is drying. It feels weird to sit and hold something to dry. You could if you wanted to, but because I already have those acrylic blocks, it's nice and easy to just put them down and make sure something glues down flat while I am busy with something else. Now you can tell that I'm doing this card designs exactly the same. The only difference is the colors that I've chosen, as well as coloring in the flowers or whatever. But it just goes to show that one background doesn't need to only be one way. You can change up subtle things and create different cards. Now on this second sentiment here, I actually got a little bit of that Distress Collage medium on my mirror paper. And if you've ever used mirror paper before, it is not very forgiving when it comes to getting glue on top of it. So if you notice this while it's still drying, just a baby wipe or a lightly damp cloth can wipe that right off. I have some black stickles here, and I'm just doing little dots on some of the dots from the foiling, and then I'm taking my die pick and I'm just kind of pulling them in just to kind of create the stamens and the look of the center of the poppy a little bit more. I don't usually I don't usually use black stickles. In fact, before I went and looked for it, I didn't even know if I had any, but this particular card and poppies just kind of call for it. It looks perfect with this, and by drawing it in, you're kind of mimicking the look of the actual poppy flowers a little bit more here. It's nice and easy to do. Already have the die pick. If you don't have a die pick, you could also use a toothpick or a thumbtack. That would work as well. When you use stickles, you want to make sure to let it sit and dry for a while before you do anything else with it. It does take a little while to dry, and that depends on how much you use. After that black was dry, I also decided to do some Stardust stickles on the foiled poppies. They do have openings to the background for the little stamens or those little centers of the flower, so I thought a tiny bit of sparkle there would look quite nice. This one, though, I just did dots. I didn't use my die pick to pull them together. Let that dry completely overnight, and here are my finished cards with foiling and just a touch of sparkle. Let me know what your favorite color scheme is. I know I have a favorite. I'm just curious if yours is. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a fabulous day.